This is Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi. Here now, Tony Bruschi.
Barry Morphew. We're going to talk about this case. There's a lot of people that support Barry Morphew. You should be aware of that. We're going to talk about arguments of guilt and arguments of innocence in this case. So I guess keep an open mind if you're brand new to this story. It starts back on Mother's Day weekend in 2020. The quiet mountain town of Sedate, Colorado, woke to news that one of its own, 49-year-old Suzanne Morphew, had vanished. She was described as a kind, warm, and devoted mother of two teenage daughters. When she failed to return from what her husband said was a bike ride, a massive search effort was launched. Helicopters, drones, canine units combed the rugged terrain, and for weeks, neighbors joined law enforcement in the desperate hunt, holding on to the hope that maybe she was injured, maybe lost, maybe still alive. That hope faded as time stretched on and suspicions grew closer to home. From the very beginning, Barry Morphew, Suzanne's husband, for over 2 decades, was at the center of that suspicion. His account of events has raised questions. He said Suzanne went out for a ride on her mountain bike on May 10th and never came back home. Yet investigators almost immediately noted gaps in his story. His phone had been off during critical hours. His movements didn't fully align with what neighbors reported. And perhaps most unsettling, Suzanne's phone and personal items were later found discarded not far from their home. In 2021, Barry was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and attempting to influence public officials. Prosecutors painted a picture of a man desperate to control the narrative, who may have seen his marriage unraveling and chose violence over divorce. They pointed to messages suggesting Suzanne had considered leaving. They highlighted inconsistencies in Barry's explanations. For a time, it seemed the case would head to trial, but the path to justice for Suzanne was anything but straightforward. In 2022, just days before the jury selection was set to begin, prosecutors moved to dismiss the charges. They said they weren't ready. Discovery issues, particularly around key evidence, forced their hand. The court granted the dismissal without prejudice, which meant charges could be refiled later. For Barry, it was a reprieve. For everybody watching this case, it was a holy crap moment. This is what really happens when you fail at your job. It was not an exoneration, though. For Suzanne's family, it was devastating. They were left waiting again, caught between grief and uncertainty, knowing the truth was still buried. The truth didn't begin to surface until September of 2023, when search teams following up on unrelated work discovered human remains in a remote area of the county. Dental records confirmed what many had feared for more than 3 years. Suzanne had been found. Finally, there was a body. Finally, investigators could ask the medical examiner what had happened to her. The autopsy completed in 2024 delivered both answers and new questions. The medical examiner ruled the manner of death a homicide, but the cause was listed as unspecified means. In other words, there was no obvious trauma on the skeletal remains, no fractures consistent with blunt force, no bullet wounds. There was something else, though. A chemical trace found in Suzanne's bone marrow. It was a cocktail of drugs used to tranquilize animals. Drugs that, according to investigators, were not commonly available to the public. And yet, Barry Morphew had access. Prosecutors seized on that finding. They argued that Barry, who worked in landscaping and hunting circles, had a prescription for that very tranquilizer. In their view, the presence of the drug in Suzanne's remains was not a coincidence. It was evidence that he had the means, the access, and the opportunity to incapacitate her. In 2025, after reviewing the evidence, a Colorado grand jury returned a new indictment, and Barry Morphew was again charged with murder. This time, the state came to court armed with what they believed was a stronger, cleaner evidence. They emphasized not only the chemical findings, but also Barry's behavior in the hours surrounding Suzanne's disappearance. Cell phone data showing unusual activity. Times when his device went dark. Bizarre movements, surveillance cameras from nearby businesses captured his truck at odd hours. Digital records suggested cleanup efforts, and in the background was a marriage under strain, with Suzanne confiding in friends that she felt trapped, unhappy, and she was considering leaving. But if the prosecution came back with sharper tools, the defense remained just as determined to fight. Barry's attorneys argued that the case was still circumstantial. They pointed to the autopsy report, no cause of death, only an unspecified means. They reminded the court that evidence of drugs in the bone doesn't explain how Suzanne died. It doesn't prove Barry administered them. And even if he had access, access is not the same as guilt. If you hear it's going to snow tonight and you go to bed, and you wake up in the morning and there's snow on the ground. Did it snow outside? That is circumstantial evidence. If you didn't watch the snow fall from the sky, but there's snow all over the ground, did it snow last night? Well, one would believe so. I mean, unless a snow cone truck blew up, snow flew everywhere, it would look like snow cone snow, though. You'd know that. Maybe it was a ski resort, one of those things that make the fake snow for the ski resorts. Maybe that went through the neighborhood and blasted snow everywhere. Could happen. They do it in movies. Or did it snow? That's circumstantial evidence. So keep that in mind. And it's the defense's job to say, well, it could have been a snow cone machine, blew up. You can't prove it wasn't. Did you see it? And then people are really good at second-guessing themselves. Well, now that you say that, wow, maybe that's a possibility. They also underscored Barry's consistent claim of innocence. From the first day Suzanne went missing, he had told anyone who would listen that he loved his wife. He had nothing to do with her disappearance. He even participated in a public plea for her return, at one point offering a reward for information. And when charges were first dropped in 2022, the defense characterized it as proof the state had rushed to judgment. Why, they asked, should anyone believe the second attempt was any more reliable than the first? For the court, these questions weighed heavily in determining whether Barry should remain behind bars while awaiting trial. Initially, bond was set at $3 million, cash only, an amount that would effectively guarantee he stayed in custody. But after months of hearings, Judge Amanda Hopkins modified that order. Barry's bond was converted into a $3 million surety cash or property bond. With the help of supporters, he posted 10%, $300,000, and walked out of the Saguache County jail in September of 2025. He didn't walk out a free man. The terms of his release are strict. He wears an ankle monitor subject to GPS tracking. His passport is surrendered. He cannot leave the state. No alcohol, no drugs, no firearms. His movement is restricted to court appearances, attorney visits, medical appointments. In essence, Barry's world has shrunk to the size of a county map. Every step tracked, every hour accounted for. So what does the evidence really show? On one side, prosecutors highlight a pattern that feels deeply troubling. A wife who wanted out of a marriage, a husband whose phone and truck data show suspicious gaps. A tranquilizer cocktail, rare and specific, showing up in her body years later. Circumstantial, yes, but circumstantial evidence has convicted many before. The state believes the combination of motive, means, and opportunity is enough to persuade a jury that Barry Morphew is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. On the other side, the defense leans into what's missing. No eyewitnesses, no camera footage of an act, no weapon, no definitive cause of death. Even an autopsy's conclusion, unspecified means, is a reminder of uncertainty. To the defense, it is impossible to convict when the very mechanism of Suzanne's death remains unclear. They argue that what the prosecution frames as suspicious gaps in data may just as easily be the quirks of modern technology. That possession of tranquilizers doesn't equal administration. The demands flaws, even marital conflict, do not add up to homicide. Forensic experts will likely battle over the science in court. How reliable is drug detection in bone marrow years after death? Can contamination be ruled out? Can dosage be determined? These are not abstract debates. They go to the heart of whether the evidence is strong enough to meet the high burden of proof. Psychologically, the case is a study in control and accountability. Prosecutors say Barry Morphew could not tolerate the prospect of losing his marriage, his family image, or his sense of power. They argue he took the most permanent, irreversible step to prevent Suzanne from leaving him. The defense counters that it is precisely this psychological framing, this narrative, that law enforcement wanted to believe. And in doing so, they ignored other possibilities, rushed the investigation, and misled the public. For Suzanne's family, the years have been a tormenting time of waiting. First for answers, then for remains, then for charges to stick. Each courtroom hearing has reopened wounds. Each procedural setback has delayed closure. And while the justice system works slowly, her absence remains immediate, a void that no verdict can truly repair. As Barry Morphew now awaits his second trial, the question is not simply whether the state can prove its case, it's whether the jury will believe that this circumstantial puzzle with its missing pieces is enough to convict. History certainly tells us juries can be swayed by patterns, by context, by what feels like the most plausible story. But history also tells us they hesitate when a case feels uncertain, when the evidence leaves gaps they cannot fill with guesswork, no matter how extreme that guesswork needs to be. And so in the story of Barry and Suzanne Morphew, accountability hangs in the balance. On one side is a promise of justice for a woman who never came home on Mother's Day. On the other is the presumption of innocence, the safeguard that protects every defendant until guilt is proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Justice is not about certainty. It's about standards. The standard in a criminal trial is high for a reason. It protects against wrongful convictions, even as it risks leaving crimes unsolved. Whether Barry Morphew's actions meet that standard is for a jury to decide. What we can say without a doubt is that Suzanne deserved better. She deserved the chance to walk away from an unhappy marriage, to pursue a life on her own terms, to be celebrated on that Mother's Day instead of remembered as missing. She deserves safety, respect, and the dignity of truth. As the trial approaches, those listening, whether in the courtroom or far beyond, must hold on to that fact, because at the end of the day, the case is not about legal strategy or courtroom theatrics. It's about accountability. It's about whether choices were made that stole a woman's life. It's about whether finally someone will be held responsible. Give me your thoughts in the comment section on this case. I know there's a lot of other pieces. It's impossible to cover all of the pieces of evidence right here in this one sole piece. And we have covered many other pieces on this channel. So feel free to look up Barry Morphew here and take a look back, because there are a lot of very questionable pieces of evidence in this case that don't look all so great for old Barry. But give me your thoughts. He's innocent until proven guilty, and he maintains his innocence. So give me your thoughts in the comments section. And be sure to press subscribe wherever you are listening to this podcast so you don't miss any of our coverage on this and the many cases we got for you right here at the Hidden Killers Podcast and True Crime Today. I'm Tony Bruschi. We'll talk again real.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Bruschi and the Hidden Killers Podcast.